All right, bringing it out to the table, Joey. From what we're hearing from Trey after he spoke with the president seems maybe a tad bit frustrated, and we know that this has been an ongoing conversation all week long about Israel's role in all of this. But I think it's interesting that the president's reaction was, you've shot your missiles, that's enough. Now get back to the negotiating table. It feels like this is an escalation from Iran, but the president might not see it that way. Maybe he feels like it's Iran's last hurrah, their last thing they have to prove before they come back and have serious talks. What do you make of it?
I mean, it's absolutely an escalation by Iran. Iran can say it's because Israel is still fighting Hezbollah, which is kind of laughable considering just a few months ago Iran would have said they're not supporting Hezbollah, or at least not directly. But at the end of the day, we know that's true. We know that's where we are. And the ball's in President Trump's court. He understands what's at stake here. There's political collateral, then there's real people collateral. I don't think President Trump wants to see anybody die, much less Americans. But at the same time, you can't be President Trump that says, I'm going to carry a big stick and talk loudly and let Iran shoot missiles into, our military bases if that becomes what happens, and not do something about it. So the deterrence versus defeat right now, it would take months or a year to defeat Iran's military completely. Can we do things to deter? Can we do diplomacy? President Trump sure is trying hard, but Iran's not making it easy.
Rachel, does the president move to do anything, though, militarily on behalf of or in coordination with Israel at this point? Or does the president seem more like he's going to let them deal with it and he's going to stay out of it? He mentioned to Trey that he wasn't a part of Israel's initiative. So perhaps,
Lebanon, you mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
perhaps he leaves it to them and he still wants Iran to come back to the table. How do you see that playing out?
Well, if we take the president at his words, this week alone, he's not happy that Israel is bombing Lebanon, that this is actually hurting the negotiation. In fact, he said, quote, referring to the conversation where he called Benjamin Netanyahu crazy and said, everyone hates you, stop doing this. He said, quote, I was a little perturbed at his constantly fighting with Lebanon. So we have one front of a war. We've partnered with Israel in Iran. And perhaps the hope, I thought, was that the negotiation on that war was to get rid of the nuclear weapons, make sure they don't have that, and hopefully they can deal with Hezbollah through that negotiation. But if you keep bombing Lebanon and killing the Lebanese people, many of them are Christians. Christian villages are getting bombed. Lots of bad stuff happening. Look, Hezbollah's hands are dirty in this for sure. And so is Iran, because Iran funds Hezbollah. At the same time, the Lebanese people, many innocent people, are being caught in the crossfire. So I think the best way is to get to the negotiating table, as the president said, okay, did your bombs, let's all get back. And hopefully the president can lead and end, or at least contain, the Hezbollah problem through the negotiation. But maybe I'm being a Pollyanna-ish here. I don't know.
Joe, it's only been up until recently that the discussions with Hezbollah and Lebanon have really entered into what is supposed to be a discussion between the United States and Iran. And, of course, Israel's naturally going to be a part of that in some ways. But it feels like it's really shifted and recalibrated to be much more about what Israel is doing.
Yeah.
I don't know how that changes things for our president and our country, but how do you see this latest news playing out?
Well, negotiating with Iran means negotiating with Hezbollah or Hamas. They're just tentacles of that, proxies, as we call them. Some good news out of these strikes, there are only 4 missiles fired. And in the olden days, we're talking about before the U.S. went to war, that would be dozens, that would be hundreds. That tells you either Iran was trying to fire something that was symbolic, just to say, hey, we're firing back, haha, or they don't have the capability to do it. So all I know is that the Iron Dome captured, intercepted all of those missiles, didn't hit any targets. And if I want to bring this back to a political aspect for a moment, Graham Plattner, who's running for Senate, who we're talking about later in this show, absolutely is for no money towards Israel whatsoever, including no funding for the Iron Dome. AOC cried on the congressional floor when funding for the Iron Dome passed. So there are elements of the U.S. who are probably not happy that these missiles were intercepted to a certain extent, because they want Israel to be defanged and therefore destroyed. That's the calculus right now overall of where we are politically. And also, by the way, if gas prices have gone down 30 cents in the last 2 weeks, all right, that's good. If they go below $4 and back towards $3, that helps, obviously, Republicans in the midterms. If this thing lingers until September, October, then early voting starts, and we're still in the same place that we are now, right before the midterms, then Republicans have some big problems as far as winning those midterms.
So, I mean, you know, these rockets weren't fired towards U.S. troops. They were fired towards Israel, right? President Trump's shown he's not happy with the fact that Israel was continuing its campaign against Lebanon, even in a ceasefire, or against Hezbollah, even in a ceasefire with Israel and Lebanon. We have to remember that Hezbollah is kind of an autonomous proxy within Lebanon, but like Rachel says, it's the Lebanese people that are caught in the crosshairs. There's nothing here that says President Trump has retaliated at all. That's kind of what we're looking to see. Of course, President Trump wants to see all the missiles stop and actually move towards something that looks like peace. He needs that. But at the end of the day, it may be Iran trying to publicly sever the U.S. and Israel a little bit, and President Trump may be put in a situation where that's what he has to do. He has to say, we're not responding, they didn't fire on us, and we're trying to get a peace deal. If Israel wants to be a part of this peace deal, they've got to stop attacking Hezbollah. But at the same time, Bibi Netanyahu's sitting there in Israel, and he's got his own right that says, you're being a puppet of Trump. You're not getting the win that you promised us because Trump's holding you back. And so there are a lot of tensions here. This is a complex thing. We knew that going into it. There are a lot of questions on why we went into it. These answers are to come, I believe. But between now and then, President Trump has one thing he has to do. He has to secure a victory with Iran other than opening the Strait of Hormuz. That's politically, that's what he has to do. Yeah. That victory can't be the Navy's at the bottom of the sea and they don't have an Air Force, because those weren't the things we were worried about to begin with. It has to do with their long-range ballistic missiles and their nuclear weapons capability. There has to be something tangible that you can show, and it has to be more than what Operation Midnight Hammer did. And I'm not saying those things aren't on the table or he's not getting there, but that's what the American people have an appetite for politically.
The problem, though, is that you go into a war with a partner and you think you have the same objective. And to be fair, I think at the beginning of the war, the president and I think everybody thought it was going to be a regime change, but very quickly you realized that was not going to be easy. And the president did the right thing. He adjusted and said, you know what, we want to make sure they don't have nukes. That will be good for us, and we can't have them controlling the Straits of Hormuz. But when your partner, Israel, they have a different objective. For them, what's best is no Iran or a regime change. And so that's the conflict. And that's the question. And I think overall, you know, maybe it's time to think about, do you go into these kinds of conflicts when you have two different national security objectives? It complicates it. And not only are people dying in Lebanon, but the American people are being hurt by these gas prices. Yeah. So I think American objectives are the best for America. And that's what we ought to do.
And I think President Trump knows that full well, and I think that's why he has the frustration. The American people are not going to continue to pay high gas prices. Although we love Israel, they're not going to be able to sustain that just for Israel's sake. I think the president knows that, and I trust that he will act accordingly.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.